Hey everyone, welcome back to Satanix Reviews. Today I'll be discussing another childhood favorite of mine, Kirby Superstar Ultra. This was the first Kirby game I ever played. I don't really know why I wanted this game. Maybe it's just because it was a DS game. The DS was my favorite console as a child. It's how I played Pokemon games. So I assumed the same care and attention would go to this new series that I never heard of before. Now I know this is a remake of another game, simply called Kirby Superstar for the Super Nintendo, but I didn't know that at the time. If anything, I feel like this game surpasses the original, so there's not much reason for me to discuss that game because I'll just be repeating the same things over and over again. In all Kirby games, you get to inhale your enemies and eat them. Sometimes this does absolutely nothing, but this can also copy their abilities. Each of these abilities has some sort of new movesets depending upon the ability. Thankfully, the pause menu gives you the entire list. Personally, my favorite of these abilities is Hammer. It's really strong, and using the Flaming Hammer uppercut deals a ton of damage. I use this all the time during all of the boss fights during the arena and the true arena. With that said, Kirby isn't alone in this installment. He can recruit friends in this game. You can summon them at any time, and they can either be controlled by the CPU or by another player for some fun co-op play. So are you familiar with anthologies? Those movies, shows, and books that feature several individual stories instead of one linear plot? That's what this game basically does. It isn't just one game, it's many games. But it's not even a collection of already existing games. Unless you count the first game, Spring Breeze, which is a remake of the first Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land, and also Revenge of the King, which is essentially a harder version of Spring Breeze, with an added boss fight and an added final level, but we'll get into that one later. The rest of the games are original. There's Dynablade, a story about a giant firebird attacking Dreamland, the Great Cave Offensive, a labyrinth story about Kirby navigating an underground maze containing all sorts of treasures and artifacts, Gourmet Race, a racing story about Kirby and King Dedede competing for speed while also eating as much food as possible, Revenge of Meta Knight, the one and only time Meta Knight was the main villain, as he uses his ship, the Howlbird, to take over Dreamland, and Milky Way Wishes, which was the final story of the original Kirby Superstar, where the sun and moon started fighting, and Kirby has to search the surrounding planets for 7 stars. Insert Mario RPG joke here. In order to ask Galacta Nova for a wish to stop the sun and moon from fighting. Then you have the arena, a boss rush against every single boss in the collection. After that, you get to try out Revenge of the King and Meta Nightmare Ultra, where you play from Spring Breeze all the way to Milky Way Wishes, aside from the Gourmet Race. But there's an alternate finale once you've completed the Milky Way Wishes segment. There's also Helper to Hero, where you play as any of the partner characters, and finally, the true arena, where your skills are truly put to the test. You face the hardest boss battles in the entire game, as well as a new final boss. For the most part, this game is pretty easy. You have unlimited continues, and your progress is always saved to let you continue whichever level you last played. Kirby is not a series that's meant to be difficult. In fact, the first game was meant to be a beginner game for kids who are just getting into Nintendo games. With that said, it's not without its difficult moments. Sometimes the stage hazards can get the best of you, and some bosses can take a while to defeat. The true arena is especially difficult. Those final 4 bosses are just an endurance test. Surprisingly, there's not much to discuss when it comes to dark elements in this game. It's pretty common for people nowadays to point out that these games with such a cute and adorable protagonist can come across some scary demons of hell. However, this game doesn't quite have that aside from maybe the true final boss's sound effects and design. There isn't anything really that complex about it either. But maybe that's just what I like about it. It's simple and to the point. Don't get me wrong, I still like when my games are complex or have character development, but sometimes you just have to play something mindless but fun. I'd rather a game's first priority be make this game fun to play than try too hard to make a complex story to the point where you forget to make the gameplay interesting. Now it's time for my mandatory video game music praise. This game has a catchy as hell soundtrack. You thought I found Pokemon Black and White soundtrack iconic? I'm guaranteed to start humming these tracks once I hear quite a few of them. Some of them have such high energy, some are epic and bombastic. Any of the music from the Halberd is great, and I think everyone can agree on the quality of that boss theme from Revenge of the King. This music just brings me back to being an energetic kid again. This is easily among my favorite soundtracks of all time, so I highly recommend listening to it. Well, okay, I recommend the game as well. Next, I'll talk about the graphics and the characters. They're very bright and colorful, as you'd assume. The art style is very cute and unique. Kirby is, of course, the star of the show, so his plain but memorable design is always to be remembered for his pink and round form. There's also King Dedede, who used to be the original villain of the franchise until the games felt like making him either possessed constantly or getting him to join forces with Kirby to stop a new threat. But he's still got his place in the series. I like that they tried to make him a straight up villain again in this, and this becomes prominent in Revenge of the King, where he feels like he's strong enough to defeat Kirby with his new army and a secret weapon that I won't spoil. Meta Knight is probably my favorite character outside of Kirby. Ironically, he's also a Kirby variant, but he keeps his face hidden with his iconic metal mask that only reveals his eyes. Lastly, to discuss the overall content of the game. As I stated, there are a ton of games in this collection. Once you've beaten all of them, you can still replay them in whatever order you want. On top of this, you get several sub-games, including a conveyor belt game where you have to get rid of anything that isn't food, a gallery shooter with various characters to fire at, a strength competition determined by timing your button presses, a quick draw game taken from the same type of minigame as Kirby's Adventure, which was inspired by Wild Gunman if you want to go further back, and a card catching game where you look for and steal the cards shown on the top of the screen. A lot of these mini games were added as a gimmick for the DS's touchscreen mechanics, and I know that there are some people who don't have much tolerance for that, but the main game doesn't use the touchscreen at all. These mini games are only there for quick little distractions or to compete with friends. Now that's not the end of the content because there's a way to 100% this game, so the games will have a progression tracker to tell you if you've missed something or not. Thus, you'll have to explore some of the levels in this game to get 100% completion. With that said, the hardest one of these by far is the Great Cave Offensive. There are about 4 segments in this game, and while the first area isn't difficult to navigate and explore, the other areas range from a little confusing to outright labyrinth-like. The castle especially leaves me so confused every time. Now, the main goal of the game is just to make it to the end, so you don't actually have to collect all the treasures, but I understand some people might be completionists about a game like this. Thus, it ends up being my least favorite game of the collection. Personally, my favorite is Revenge of Meta Knight, but I'd say the best is probably Milky Way Wishes. I heard rumors that this is a prequel to the other Kirby games because you can't use your copy ability, and you have to discover the abilities within the levels. There's also a twist about getting the 7 stars, but again, I won't spoil anything. The reasons why I say Revenge of Meta Knight is my favorite is because the music is great, the fights on the halberd are exciting and high energy, and the 2-part finale against Meta Knight is absolutely classic. Overall, this is a great starter game for anyone who wants to get into the Kirby series. I hope this version of the game gets ported to modern consoles instead of the original Super Nintendo version, which you can get on the Switch Online. Not to say that one's bad or anything, but this game, Persona 3 Reload, and Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver are all rare exceptions of video game remakes that give me little to no reason to play the originals because the remakes just feel better to play. If you do prefer the original, that's great. Both games are still really good, and I do recommend trying both of them out to see which one is better to your liking. I'd rate this game a 10 out of 10. Keep in mind, a 10 out of 10 doesn't mean that it's perfect. It just means that I enjoy it that much. Realistically, I'd be giving this game about an 8 or a 9, but I still really love this game. Next, I'll be doing our first movie review. Tune in next week to see what it is.